Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some overly sarcastic productions, and this time we have returned to Trope Talk, the newest one, as of recording this, Downtime. Now, this is one that I do enjoy. It is, I think, definitely, it's got, really in every book, there's gotta be some downtime. In any story, there's gotta be some moment of brevity. Now, depending upon the pacing of your story, right? If you are doing a pretty short story that is rather somewhat fast paced, often this moment of downtime, the moment of brevity, is right before your climax. And sometimes I think it is a bit of a trope to have the climax occur during the moment of downtime, right? The moment your characters enjoying their downtime is interrupted by the climax happening. Um, I feel like that one's a bit of a trope that happens now and again. In thicker books, right, it tends to be more spread out. You get a bit more downtime. So, another thing that is great about downtime, I think the biggest benefit to it in terms of your storytelling is that it helps the audience better connect to the characters. It is a moment in which the audience has a chance to learn about the characters outside of the necessities of the plot. You can get um in a story that I wrote, the one that I'm currently trying to get published, though, and have been submitting chapters to my writer's workshop. Um, there is a while the characters are on their way to their next destination, they have a little chat, and so it is a moment of downtime, while still, because it is not like a super thick book, it is like a 126,000 word long book, so it's 416 manuscript pages long. Um, this is a relatively early moment. It's like in chapter 7 or something. It's within the first like 80 pages. Um, and yeah, it's a moment for the wider cast of characters to chat, to get, for the audience to see how they interact, and also get a bit of understanding about each of these characters. It's a great moment to put that veil up of depth, right? The to make your iceberg, to have the illusion of depth. Because obviously you cannot make these characters wholly unique characters as people are in real life. And so what downtime can do is it can help you establish that illusion of realism in regards to character building. Um, that's really that's how I view the use of downtime. That's how I like to use it in my storytelling, both in Dungeons and Dragons when the group is sitting around a campfire or something like that, or in my stories that I like to write. I use it as essentially entirely. The goal of them is to better connect the characters to the audience. Um, there is, of course, world building in it, right? Essentially every conversation your characters have would essentially be a little bit of world building. Obviously, I'm over exaggerating that there, but like, I think you know what I mean. Um, all that said, let's go ahead and hear Red's thoughts.
I know this is a controversial take in a culture that equates productivity with moral righteousness and determines
Oh, yep.
the value of a human life by how much work it can spend itself on in a given day, but everybody needs to take breaks. Now, before I pat myself on the back too hard for this groundbreaking wisdom, what I
Hmm.
mean is not that everybody needs sleep and weekends, although those are both true and important. What I mean is everybody needs a chance to get away from the grind and choose what they're doing for a while. And that might sound strange or
Choice. Choice. And that actually reminds me, right, again, and what downtime does in regards also to better establish character is we can establish why the characters are there in this moment, why they are doing this, what they want, that they are choosing this, right? And so you can help, again, take away the help increase the illusion of that the author's hand is not there, right? the audience never wants to feel the author's hand in a story. It's what one of the probably the biggest thing that will take them out. The audience feels the author's hand guiding the narrative, even though that is literally what a story is. It is the author guiding these characters down a path, right? The story can't happen otherwise if the author is not doing that. But, right, no one wants to actively feel it. They want the illusion that these are real characters, real people, or whatever, doing this, and that it makes sense for them to do these things. Like, if it were to be applied to real life, like they could see these characters being together, right? They want to be able to, yeah. I'm yapping so much. My voice is gonna eat me for it. Um, they right, and so downtime can help establish character motivations for why they are involved in the plot, and so it can help increase the disassociation of the authorial hand from the audience. I think that's the right way to phrase it. I don't know. Anyways.
basic or whatever, but in my observation, true self determination is a luxury in extremely short supply. Most people who work a traditional job or attend schooling, which is most people, are fundamentally placed in a very reactive state. Tasks are given by some higher authority, and they're expected to do them and do them right, or there will be consequences. This means they've got very little active choice in the matter of what they're actually doing from day to day. And there's a whole rabbit hole of tangents we could go down here about how in a wealth based society, freedom of choice is something that must be bought and paid for, and the choice to live how you want is conditional on being able to afford it, and even small scale choices like what to eat in a given day are luxuries gated behind price point. But
Oh, comrade red, comrade red, comrade red.
while all that is definitely worth examining, it's not really the point of this video. Or is
Oh,
it? More
can
on
it
that
be? Please, I would love it.
later. The point of this video is planted
Wait, hold on,
firmly.
what was
Not
that?
really the point of this video. Or is it? More on that later. The point of this video
Comrade
is
red.
planted firmly in the fertile soil of fiction land, where a character's freedom of choice is a carefully curated illusion that exists entirely for the entertainment of the audience. Fictional characters do not need to eat, sleep, or take vacations, but the effectiveness of a story is frequently rooted in
Okay, now she's getting into the like meta reason or whatever for the existence of downtime, and she's entirely correct, right? The audience will need, especially depending on the length of the story, right? Hence why shorter stories can get away with not really having much downtime or any at all up until like the point of climax. Like you should still, I believe, have a point of downtime somewhere in your story. Short stories, like really, really short stories, don't need it, but like novellas do need them. And often those are in like novellas. They are often the point right before the climax, just because that's where it most makes sense for the pacing of the story. Um, but in like longer books, A Song of Ice and Fire, Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives, there's going to be these moments of downtime dispersed throughout the entirety of the book. Though, of course, in the midst of the Sanderlanche, there really isn't, right? And that is because, again, in those long books, they don't need a downtime in the near the point of climax because the downtime was spread out the rest of the book building up to this moment. So, right, the audience, right, it works a bit better. That I don't know if I'm saying things right here, but I'm gonna trust you guys. You guys are smart, right? I hope so. To to understand what I mean, even when I don't make sense. Um, I lost my train of thought. Oh, right, the meta reason, right? Also, the audience needs the downtime because, right, if you're just giving them plot, 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 intensity, it's going to burn them out, and they're going to get it like exhausted. Right, you don't want to exhaust your audience when it comes to reading your book. So, downtime is a good moment for the audience to breathe, relax a bit, stop sort of thinking about the plot, and just let their brains relax. Anyways.
making the audience forget that this is true. And it is in this space of smoke and mirrors that we encounter the trope known as downtime. At its roots, downtime is a technical term from computing that refers to the time a machine spends non-functional due to damage, malfunction, repairs, or just being offline between bouts of work. When applied to people, it usually means the same thing. Uncharitably, it can be described as time spent being unproductive, but more loosely and less judgmentally, it's time spent doing anything other than your obligations, whatever those may be. And in fiction land, the greatest obligation is naturally to the plot. For fictional characters, downtime is generally spent.
And again, right? This is actually Avatar: The Last Airbender. Specifically, this is a great example of what I was talking about earlier. Season 3 is a pretty intense season, but it's also short because it's a children's animated show, right? Like 20 some episodes, each like 30 minutes long or so, right? That's not a lot of time. I mean, that is still several hours of story, but like, I mean, that's still not that much time. So like if you were to put that in narrative form, that wouldn't be that long of a book. And so right, they pace it perfectly in season 3. They have our I mean, I think there's probably another moment of downtime before this one here, but I think this is the biggest example because again, it shows up right before our climax, right before our final fight, and it is needed for that to let the audience relax before we're about to watch the smackdown.
Not actively reacting to or advancing the plot. Characters engaged in downtime might pursue hobbies, take vacations, engage in filler episode hijinks like beach trips or low-stakes baking escapades, or broadly just take a second and vibe. Downtime episodes might contain plot-relevant information or advance character arcs, or even end with the characters getting ambushed by extremely plot-central events, but the conceit of the downtime adventure is that the characters are putting down the plot for a minute and doing what they want to do instead. But like, why would they do that? Typically, a story's plot is its purpose for existing, and downtime would naturally be a waste of precious time that could be spent explaining more things or splicing in more cool action sequences. Well, a major benefit of spending precious screen time on downtime is in maintaining the illusion of humanity and free will. As mentioned.
Oh my god, I said that. I said that too. I said that too. Guys, Red and I are the same wavelength today. That rarely happens.
Fictional characters are narrative tools under the writer's control, serving as part of the overarching story, not real people with wants and needs. But most stories are infinitely more impactful if the audience is persuaded to forget that, so the characters are generally carefully crafted to act as much like a real person as possible, acting exhausted or debilitated when the plot's been running them ragged, even though we never see them sleep anyway, seemingly suffering from hunger or thirst even if we've seen them run just fine before on 0 on-screen meals, and, most importantly, appearing to make choices, even though every action they take is chosen by the writer. To give a character downtime is to create a very useful illusion surrounding them, the illusion that they have a life and existence outside of the story. And this isn't just about letting them have a snack or a nap or take a self-care day, it's about showing the audience what the character chooses to do when they aren't being forced to react to the plot.
Yes.
A character in a reactive state is limited by circumstance into only showing the sides of themselves that the specific scenario they're reacting to reveals. Since most stories are about plot, most characters are only ever shown responding to varying levels of high-stakes situations, from comedy shenanigans up to crises and disasters. But to create a properly immersive illusion, it can be very helpful to answer the question, what would these characters be doing otherwise? Now, obviously, this question, like everything else in the space of storytelling, is a clever illusion. Without the plot, the characters wouldn't be here. The characters exist to react to the circumstances the writer places them in. Once the plot is done, the story will end, the happily ever after screen will drop, and the characters will vanish into the off-screen
Well, happily ever after. Dependent
zone of non-existence. But when a story shows us characters in their downtime, it answers a question that the structure of the story is not built to answer. If the story stopped existing but the characters magically didn't, what would those characters do with their time? This tells the audience what that post-ending happily ever after might theoretically look like. It shows us what we can assume the characters get up to when the camera's off, even though when the camera is off, the character stops existing. I feel like this is a weird thing for me to be focusing on. I'm usually first in line to overthink what happens in a story when when you start looking past the edges of the screen, to talk about characters like they've got lives and minds of their own that the story is just giving us a little peek into. Characters written convincingly enough take on lives of their own in the minds of the audience, who elaborate compelling narratives out into the fanfiction zone of endless possibilities. And of course, for the writer, the characters are probably very alive. It's communicating that complexity that becomes difficult in the course of writing the story that those characters are in. But to understand the function of downtime, I really do think it's important to remind ourselves what fiction is. A story is, by its nature, a very limited thing that, through clever use of implication, persuades its audience to extrapolate it out into a rich and complicated world full of living people. Downtime is a tool of implication used to pretend the story and characters are capable of more than just participating in the plot they're part of. Downtime is the cleverly arranged set of mirrors that turn a small stage into a seemingly infinite environment. It's legitimately vital in selling the illusion, but in order to understand it, we have to engage with it as what it is. A character doesn't decide to take a nap, practice the saxophone, play poker, or go out for drinks with the gang. A character doesn't decide to do anything. What the writer chooses to show the character doing with their downtime becomes, by implication, a reflection of what this character does when they aren't forced to do the plot, and that can be extremely revelatory. In most, but not all, stories, the implicit goal of the characters is to finish the plot. Get the ring to Mordor, complete that 5-year mission to seek out new life and new civilizations, defeat the Decepticons once and for all, so the characters exist to accomplish that goal, and from a writing perspective, once they're done, they're done. They're not separate from the story, they're aspects of it. But for the audience, who is presumably getting invested in these characters and formulating richer, more complex versions of them in their minds than they actually get to see on screen, it's easier to root for these characters to succeed in their goal of ending the story if the audience has some idea of what happy ending the characters will get to enjoy after they win. Downtime gives us a clear look at what the character wants to do if they didn't have to devote themselves to the plot, and how they would ideally spend their relaxing post-protagonism retirement. Of course, that's the simple way to do it, if the writer wants to be nice. Downtime can also be used to prime the audience for some gratuitous knife twisting. We all know that if a character talks
Guilty as charged. As long as I did it right.
about how much they're looking forward to their retirement, that means they're about to straight up die. If the audience is told that a character is due for their happily ever after, the writer can get a ton of easy emotional mileage out of ripping that away. And that can take a lot of forms. A character is looking forward to retiring to start a family with a love interest, oopsies, that love interest is dead. A character has dreams of switching careers, oopsies, they just received a career-ending injury. A character who used to optimistically dream of a better tomorrow has become so crushed and jaded that they can't believe in one anymore. These losses or sacrifices are only impactful if the audience is convinced of how nice it would have been for the character to not lose them, and that is work done in downtime. If the audience only sees the character in their limited functional role of advancing the plot, we don't feel it when they lose the things they ostensibly care about outside of it. Downtime doesn't just give us a glimpse into what the character likes doing when they aren't on the clock, it convinces the audience that it'll mean something if the story takes those things away. But that also does a little bit of sneaky extra work, because if the downtime is that nice, and the plot takes the form of some peril that endangers the circumstances of the downtime and only threatens to take it away from the characters, the audience and the characters can be easily convinced that it's very important for the characters to succeed so everyone can chill out in safety. Hell, this kind of story beat can be done at basically any point in the story. It's practically tradition that most high fantasy stories start with the character's peaceful home village being brutally burned to the ground by the big bad. This kind of story starts in downtime with the humble hero dicking around in Dullsville, perhaps dreaming of someday enjoying a glorious adventure if the writer wants to serve up an extra helping of cruel irony, and then bam! Their home is utterly destroyed and they lose the space where they were going to park their downtime. They have nothing left except advancing the plot and theoretically saving the rest of the world from suffering their same fate. Any future downtime, meals at campfires, nights spent in inns, are going to naturally be compared to that lost comfort of home, and that feeds into some very simple emotional knife twisting as the character reflects on what the big bad took away from them. But if we don't get to see that initial downtime, all this angst becomes hypothetical. We assume the character has more that they want than just advancing the plot, but if we don't get glimpses of that depth, we don't really feel it. One simple reason why stories feature downtime is to strengthen pacing. A plot that's just pure non-stop action.
I said that too. Guys, look at me go. I know things. I know things. Look at that. Oh, how far we've grown.
24/7 is going to feel somewhat exhausting, but more than that, it's going to feel monotonous. All high-octane action blurs together into one big mess.
I really need
What
to
makes
watch
the action
Castlevania.
pop is the contrast with the quiet parts. If you paint a canvas all pure bright red, that red's not going to feel as bright as if you were using that same shade to highlight an image that's mostly dark. In order for the loud parts to mean something, you gotta give the audience some quiet parts in between. One writer
Yes.
that uses downtime in a very effective way is Tolkien. Both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books are very very careful to spend a lot of time on their respective protagonists just vibing in comfort and safety. The Shire is an idyllic slice of countryside with nothing wrong with it beyond judgmental neighbors and the occasional scary dog. Perhaps unsurprising for a writer who lost all his friends in one world war and then got to watch a second one chew up and spit out a brand new generation, Tolkien wrote a lot about what a wonderful privilege it is to have peace and quiet. It's an element of the books that doesn't translate well to the screen because the pacing requirements of movies are a lot more limited, but a
Yeah.
lot of time passes between the major plot points, especially in Lord of the Rings. Frodo has the ring in storage for 17 years before Gandalf rocks up with his inciting incident, and every time anyone goes to Rivendell, they get to spend weeks relaxing and unwinding. And while this feels kind of indulgent, I actually think it's tremendously important, not just for pacing to make the high-stakes action scenes feel more jarring, but because it plays directly into the themes of the story. Our heroes have time to rest in the books. It almost feels like they have all the time in the world. Weeks, months, or even years pass without incident. And yet, the danger is still there, moving ever closer, burning across Middle-earth, inch by inch, slowly approaching the world our heroes know and care about. The movies are paced kinda frantically in comparison, and the heroes have a lot less choice in when and how they take action, since most of it ends up being reaction. Everything feels very non-stop, very go-go-go, very proximate and immediate. In the books, the Fellowship is given a lot more time to chill the hell out, but the existence of plenty of downtime does nothing to counteract the existence of the massive threat looming on the horizon. They can find peace and even joy in moments of quiet, but they can never have lasting safety unless they drag themselves out of bed and choose to do the hard, bloody, dangerous work of.
And honestly, hold on. A little bit of a controversial take here, maybe. Um, there is in the Hobbit movies, I feel now in particular movie one of the Hobbit, which is the best of the Hobbit trilogy. Still not as good as any of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, of course. Um, but I do feel like the Bilbo and Thorin and company, their downtime I think is done better in their first movie than really any of the downtime in Lord of the Rings movies, because I don't know, there's just something about it that I felt, and maybe it's because of the difference of story. I was better able to feel their individual choices in being there, whereas in Lord of the Rings the plot is very much because is Sauron coming in to conquer the world, right? It needs to be it needs to be different, right? And so I think the downtime was better communicated in movie one of The Hobbit. And it's been a couple years since I've watched The Hobbit. Um, so this could change on whenever I decide to watch the Hobbit movies again. Um, specifically the Unexpected Journey. But and it's not like a negative on the Lord of the Rings movies. The Lord of the Rings movies are my favorite movies of all time. I think they are perfectly paced for what they really need to be. For what they need to do, I think they are perfect. Um pretty much. But yeah, I don't know. There's just something about the downtime in Hobbit 1 that just felt better established, better, like, just in regards to character decision making and stuff like that. It felt less reactionary, whereas the downtime in the Lord of the Rings movies feel very much like the characters still don't have much choice. Um, and that could also be because of the size, right? The the Hobbit movies are essentially lengthening the book, whereas Lord of the Rings trilogy are shortening the books. Um, so it could be because of that changes the perspective there. But yeah,
Of ensuring that safety by defeating Sauron. This gives them a smidge more agency than they get in the movies, and it also reframes the thread of the story in a really interesting way. This form of evil is unglamorous, untheatrical, more of a slow poisoning than a Disney villain with a big cool cape. The vibe it gives is more glacial, slow and ponderous, and unthinkably vast. Sure, for now Rivendell and the Shire.
right, and it ties into the themes directly of Tolkien, of the story and Tolkien's own personal beliefs about evil. Evil is a constant. It is ever lurking and it is ever approaching. And so it requires good, goodness of man, to also ever be stalwart, to always fight back against it. Right? Otherwise, um, darkness will forever leak. It'll push its lines forward if hope and goodness relax or whatever. Oh, I feel like I'm phrasing this so wrong, right? Because obviously Tolkien wants, like, he's like explaining, like, hey, people should relax, but also, hey, um, darkness is ever present. You need to be active in your fight again. I don't know how to word this. It makes sense in my head.
Are safe, but if our heroes don't get back to the quest and defy that terrifyingly vast enemy to destroy the ring, they are not going to stay safe. The primary conflict our heroes face when gathering allies is convincing them to take action before the forces of Sauron literally knock down their door. To
Yes.
protect the downtime, they have to leave the downtime. This is why I will forever be butthurt that the movies didn't bother to include the scouring of the Shire, and instead our heroes return home at the end to find it completely safe and fine. The books showed definitively that our heroes' downtime corner was not immune to Mordor, and if they'd stayed where things were comfortable, that comfort.
Yeah, it's one of the. I'm really depending upon the point being made as to why you want to include the scouring of the Shire. I go back and forth with it all the time. I think in regards to the movies, it is probably best that they left it out because, like, I mean, one Return of the King is already an extremely long movie, even with the extended cut. But I think, through the use of Frodo becoming disillusioned with it, I think they with Frodo's decision to leave Hobbiton and his everlasting pain that he has from being like stabbed, or at least the stabbing is the ever-present physical reminder of the journey that he went on. As we do not get his mental insights in the movie, so we do not know really the other lasting impacts of bearing the ring for so long. But I think in the movies, in defense of the movies' decision to not have the scouring of the Shire, I think they are protected by having, Frodo leave still, right? Frodo leaves because he just cannot go back to this life anymore. And so to me, that still gets across the point of the fact that Frodo just does not feel at home anymore. And I think ultimately getting that point home is far more important than the um getting the what themes and stuff the scouring of the Shire gets across, right? And I think also the inclusion of the scouring of the Shire through a vision in like Palantir, or no, not the Palantir, in Galadriel's like fountain or whatever that Frodo looks into. I think having that there as a vision helps the audience still get the scouring of the Shire in their minds of, hey, even though the Shire is far away, it is not safe. And I think what also helps that scene is when Saruman is attacking Rohan, and right, we see that one village attacked, and then those two kids essentially be, at least at the time, the only people that escape. Though of course we know later they reunite with their mother, and right, but essentially they are the only, right. We see a similar a peaceful village attacked, and so I think the movie does actually still get what this point across, the point that the scouring of the Shire makes. I think the movies are still able to effectively get across, in my opinion.
Would have been destroyed with them in it. Looking at the context Tolkien lived in, I think it's really obvious why the form he gave ultimate evil was a distant storm on the horizon, whose influence could nevertheless be keenly felt across thousands of miles by the poor souls who were keyed into it, who then had to march out to meet it if they had a hope of stopping it before it swept over their peaceful country homes and loved ones. But most of what we talked about so far presumes that the characters engaging in downtime are going to be having a nice, chill time with it. Downtime, when available, is presented as comforting, peaceful, a welcome respite from from the tribulations of the world. The simple fact is, that is not how it plays out for everyone. It can be very interesting if a character, given the chance to be free of the plot, is either unwilling or unable to clock out. Some characters just aren't built for relaxation. Stoic, badass warriors will frequently skip out on beach episodes and lazy Sundays to instead spend their time training or going on solo quests to prepare themselves for the coming plot. Or perhaps even berating their friends and allies for having the audacity to take a minute to breathe when the important stuff is still out there looming. But all this is still contingent on a few assumptions. Most critically, the assumption that when a character needs to take a breather, their circumstances will be kind enough to let them. That's right, we're looping all the way back to the beginning. I said there'd be more on that later. An inescapable element of any discussion of relaxation is the fact that being able to clock out of one's obligations for any length of time is a luxury, and by the very definition of a luxury, not everyone can afford it. A lot of things happened in 2021. Right now, we're going to focus on only one of them, the release of Squid Game. The premise of the show is simple. Desperate people in serious need of cash are offered the chance to win an enormous sum of money by competing in a series of children's games. Our hero, a chronic gambler up to his ears in debt, naturally jumps at the chance to finally dig himself out of the hole he's in and get a new lease on life. What's quickly revealed over the course of the first episode is that the stakes of the games are higher than anyone was told. Anyone who fails the first game is shot dead on the spot, causing the characters to react quite realistically. Panic, horror, outrage, etc. But unlike most death game shows, the guys running this one go, oh, if you feel that strongly about it, you can always just vote to leave. It's not even a trick or a trap or anything like that. The vote is legit. With a razor-thin margin, the players vote to leave the game, and they're all freed back to their normal lives. Their normal, impoverished lives that they were so desperate to escape they willingly committed themselves to the world's sketchiest game show for the barest chance at getting out. The second episode of the show is titled Hell, and that doesn't refer to any fucked up sadistic game show hijinks, just the fucked up sadistic reality of life, crushed by poverty and desperation and their own uniquely inescapable personal hells that, well, a massive cash infusion could fix. Every major character faced with the sudden plunge out of high-stakes plot back into their own personal downtime realizes that their downtime, their lives outside the nightmare of the games, are so hellish that they have nothing to lose by going back in. They choose to return to the games, and throughout the rest of the show, the thought of escaping basically stops being an issue, which is quite rare for a contrived death game scenario. There's just nothing for them to escape to. By showing us that the character's downtime is just as bad, if not worse, than the high-stakes life-or-death competition, the story crushes the characters into participating in the plot because there is literally nothing else for them. The show's writer shaped this story around his own life experience, trapped in debt, having to take out endless loans to support his family. It's very explicitly a commentary on the real struggles experienced in a capitalistic society. Having enjoyable downtime is a luxury, and if it costs money to stay alive, then the consequences of not having money is death. If you don't stay on the grind and earn a cash prize doled out by some powerful person with money to burn, you don't get to live. And you certainly don't get to live well. And if you try to leave, your downtime is still shaped by that system, it's just that by not participating in it, you have no hope of ever escaping it. The episode Hell is absolutely necessary to make the show work, because without it, it's just another contrived death game with bullshit rules and the implication that if our heroes just managed to sneak out the service exit, they'd be free and clear. Hell is what forces the characters and the audience to see the contrived death game for what it is. Inescapable not because it's got real good walls, but because it's supported by an entire world quietly structured the exact same way. The Squid Game is symptomatic. It's saying the quiet part out loud. It's cutting out the middleman. And the only way to convince the audience of that is by showing us that for these poor bastards, their downtime is the more hopeless and miserable alternative to the actual murder game. All the hard work has already been done for them by the capitalist system they live in. They just need to dangle a big life-changing pile of money in front of the desperate people the system has already created and force them to dance for their amusement. Man, it's a good thing nobody's brainlessly cruel enough to do that to real people in real life. I mean, you'd have to be the dumbest motherfucker in the world to treat this show specifically like a how-to guide on intentionally squeezing entertainment out of desperate people who need money to live. Thankfully, we're all extremely good at media analysis and not creating the torment nexus from the hit show For the Love of God, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. Whew, blacked out for a minute there. What was I saying? Right, downtime.
Yeah.
The point of downtime is to show what a character's life looks like
Red.
outside of the confines of the plot. And that's not always chill relaxation. It can be extremely revelatory to show that a character has no life to get back to, that they've lost everything, or that they're crushed by obligation, or they spend all their free time honing themselves into a deadlier warrior and weapon because they're physically incapable of ever thinking of anything else. Not every character knows who they're going to be when the story ends. Not all of them know how to be a normal person with a normal life. Sometimes they're so dedicated to their collective goals that they see their allies taking breaks as a personal slap in the face. Sometimes in the course of the journey, they forget how to be the person they were before they started, and they lose the ability to rest and recover. Some characters are good at compartmentalizing the horrors and taking a minute to just sit and breathe. Some characters are so good at resting and recovering that they make everyone around them better through proximity. Sometimes the whole point of a story is how important it is to take the time to take care of yourself so you'll actually be able to do all the hard stuff the plot demands. While the main events of the plot show us who the character is under pressure and obligation, who they are in downtime tells us a lot about who they are overall. A character who can relax is very different from a character who can't is very different from a character who won't. So, yeah.
And that was Trope Talk Downtime. A fantastic episode. One in which I have nothing more to say here at the end. This was great, especially Red's closing thoughts here in those last few minutes. So I hope you guys enjoyed as well as I did. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.